The air in the lawyer's office was thick with the scent of old leather and new betrayal. Across the polished mahogany table, my uncles, Mark and David, wore smug, self-satisfied smirks. They thought this was their victory lap. The lawyer, a man whose ethics were clearly for sale, droned on, reading from a document that was pure fiction, a will leaving my family token scraps and their greedy hands the entire $100 million fortune. They shared a triumphant glance, believing their deception was complete. I, Caleb Hayes, just let them have their moment, my expression a carefully constructed mask of defeat. They had played their hand, revealing a spectacular level of arrogance. They forgot one thing. Grandfather had a secret will. And they forgot who he'd named executor. They saw a grieving nephew, a pushover in a well-tailored suit. What they didn't see was Caleb Hayes, senior partner at Sterling Financial Group. For 20 years, I've navigated the treacherous waters of Boston's elite, managing fortunes that made $100 million look like pocket change. My grandfather didn't just leave me an inheritance, he gave me an education in the ruthless art of wealth. Never play their game, Caleb, he'd told me, his voice a gravelly whisper just months before he passed. You make them play yours. Uncle Mark finally broke the silence, his voice dripping with false sympathy. It's for the best, Caleb. We'll make sure you and your sister are comfortable. Comfortable. The word hung in the air, an insult wrapped in pity. They were offering me a cage when my grandfather had handed me the keys to the entire zoo. While they were busy plotting with a back-alley lawyer, my days were spent dismantling shell corporations and orchestrating hostile takeovers. They thought they were playing checkers. They had no idea I'd spent my entire career mastering three-dimensional chess. I just nodded slowly, letting them savor their hollow victory. The fall would be so much more satisfying. The crisp Boston air did little to cool the fire in my veins. As I walked from the lawyer's office, the city's steel and glass canyons felt like a familiar battlefield. My uncles weren't just greedy, they were a predictable brand of stupid. They had been circling my grandfather, Arthur Hayes, for decades. Mark, the failed stockbroker with champagne tastes and a beer budget. And David, the real estate developer whose only successful developments were his own excuses. They saw grandfather not as a father but as a vault they were born to crack. I remember the lake house incident 10 years ago. David was on the brink of bankruptcy after another disastrous condo project. He and Mark cornered grandfather in his study, pitching a convoluted scheme to sign over the family's lakeside property to one of David's shell corporations as, quote, collateral. They called it a savvy tax move. Grandfather, his eyes as sharp as ever at 82, just listened. When they finished their pathetic pitch, he didn't yell. He just said, "Get out of my house." He cut them off from any real business dealings that day. They never forgave him, and he never trusted them again. That's why, 6 months before he passed, he called me to his study. The room smelled of sea salt and old maps, the window overlooking the harbor he'd conquered. He wasn't a dying man making a last-ditch plea. He was a general giving his final briefing. He slid a simple, sealed manila envelope across his oak desk. "They will come for it all, Caleb," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "Like wolves. They'll have a document. It will look perfect. It will feel final. It will be a lie." He tapped the envelope. "This is the truth. My life's work, our family's future. It's all in here. And you, son, are its guardian." I looked at the envelope, then at him. The weight of it felt immense. "They'll think they've won," he continued, a flicker of a smile on his lips. "Let them. Pride is the most expensive luxury in the world, and they have spent their lives acquiring it. Wait until they are celebrating on the peak of their own foolishness. Then, you pull the mountain out from under them." He named me executor of that will not just because he trusted me, but because he'd spent 20 years training me. He saw the deals I closed at Sterling, the corporate sharks I outmaneuvered. He wasn't leaving his legacy to chance. He was leaving it to a weapon of his own making. My uncles thought they were in a legal battle. They were about to find out they were in a war, and my grandfather had armed me to the teeth. Back in my corner office on the 50th floor, the city of Boston spread out beneath me like a circuit board. This was my real home, a place of cold logic and calculated risk. The mask of the grieving nephew dissolved the moment the elevator doors closed. I didn't waste time on anger. Anger is a liability. Instead, I accessed the private, encrypted network my grandfather and I had built years ago, a digital fortress for our family's real assets. As expected, the alerts were already screaming. Liquidation orders. Blocks of blue-chip stocks my grandfather had held for half a century were being sold off at market price. No finesse, no strategy, just a smash and grab. They were selling the foundations to steal the furniture. Mark, with his history of failed day trading, was undoubtedly behind the keyboard, his sweaty fingers hitting sell like a jackpot button. David was likely on the phone, leveraging the newfound liquidity to prop up his failing real estate ventures. They weren't just thieves, they were incompetent thieves. I pulled up my own files on them, not the family gossip, but the hard data my firm's due diligence teams had compiled. Mark's catastrophic margin calls from last quarter. David's mountain of debt, secured against properties that were hemorrhaging value. This wasn't a victory lap for them, it was a desperate cash grab to stay afloat. They needed this money yesterday, and that made them predictable. It made them vulnerable. My phone buzzed. It was David. His voice was a thick, syrupy performance of concern. "Caleb, son, just wanted to let you know we're streamlining things. Taking the burden off your shoulders." "Streamlining," I repeated, my voice intentionally flat, hollow. "I see. It's complex, you wouldn't understand. We'll get a check sent over to you and your sister next week, a little something to help you both get by. A little something." I looked at the liquidation alert on my screen. $17 million in stock sold in the last hour alone. "Thank you, Uncle David," I said. "I appreciate you thinking of us." I hung up before he could pollute the air with another lie. He would interpret my meekness as weakness. Good. Let him. Now, for their masterpiece of fraud, the will itself. I had a high-resolution copy from the lawyer's office. I sent it to my firm's forensic document analyst, a woman who could spot a forged comma from a mile away. While she went to work, I focused on the two witnesses listed at the bottom. The first, a supposed, quote, family friend, was a man named Gregory Finch. A quick search in our database flagged him immediately. Finch was a contractor David had stiffed on his last failed condo project. He was a man with a price. The second witness was the lawyer's own paralegal. Her name was Sarah Jenkins. I made one call, to a man I keep on a very quiet, very expensive retainer. Elias isn't a private investigator. He's a ghost who finds other ghosts. "Elias," I said, my voice low. "Sarah Jenkins, formerly of Grant and Howe Legal. She resigned 2 days after the will was notarized. I want to know where she is. I want to know what her severance package looked like, and I want to know which tropical island she bought a one-way ticket to." A pause on the other end. "Consider it done." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, watching the numbers on my screen. My uncles thought they were running a race. They had no idea they were just mice in a maze I was about to build around them. The stocks they were selling, the accounts they were draining, they were just the bait. Every transaction was a digital breadcrumb, and I was about to follow the trail right to the heart of their pathetic little empire and set it on fire. Less than an hour later, a secured message blinked on my monitor. It was from Elias. The text was brutally efficient. "Ma'am Sarah Jenkins. One way, first-class ticket to Grand Cayman, departed Logan yesterday morning. Ticket purchased by East Point Holdings LLC, a shell corp registered to your Uncle David. A wire for $250,000 hit an account in her name an hour before she boarded. Account was opened last week. They're sloppy, Caleb." Sloppy was an understatement. They hadn't covered their tracks. They'd scattered breadcrumbs on a 6-lane highway. This wasn't just a conspiracy, it was a signed confession with travel receipts. Moments later, a second email arrived. It was from my forensic analyst. The subject line was a single word: amateurs. The report was attached, but the summary was all I needed. My grandfather's signature was a high-resolution digital lift from a 5-year-old real estate document. The analyst had found microscopic pixel artifacts that were an exact match. Worse for my uncles, the metadata showed the forged PDF was created a full week after times the date handwritten next to the witnesses' signatures. They had digitally traveled back in time and left a trail. I picked up the phone and dialed my sister, Emily. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with grief and anger. "Caleb, did you see what they did? We have to fight this." "We will," I said, my tone calm and absolute, a firewall against her panic. "But not yet. For now, you do nothing. You don't call them, you don't text them. If they reach out, you are devastated, you are lost, you are weak. Do you understand me, Em? We let them believe they have won completely." There was a pause. She knew my voice. This was not the tone of a grieving brother. It was the tone I used before a hostile takeover. "Okay, Caleb, I trust you." "Good," I said. "Just hold on, the show is about to start." I hung up and pulled the file on Gregory Finch. I found his cell number and dialed. He answered with a hesitant, "Hello?" "Mr. Finch, this is Caleb Hayes, Arthur Hayes' grandson." The silence on the other end was heavy with guilt. "Oh, I'm very sorry for your loss." "I appreciate that," I said, my voice smooth as polished granite. "I'm calling about your signature on the will. It seems my uncles have put you in a very difficult position. I'm also looking at the outstanding invoice your contracting company has with my Uncle David's firm. $42,000, isn't it? For the Seaport project. That's a lot of money to be chasing." I let the statement hang in the air, a perfectly weighted threat. His breathing became audible, ragged. "I don't know what you—" "We'll talk again soon, Gregory," I interrupted softly, cutting him off. "I'd advise you to stay in town." I ended the call. The first crack in their foundation had appeared. Now, it was time to bring out the sledgehammer. My finger hovered over the screen. The ghost of Gregory Finch's panicked breathing still in my ear. Squeezing a man like Finch was child's play. My uncles were the real targets, and they required a more elegant weapon. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "Never play their game, you make them play yours." Their game was forged documents and back-alley deals. My game was played on the 50th floor, with billions of dollars as the chess pieces. I didn't call my lawyer. Not yet. A legal challenge was a declaration of war. I preferred the quiet efficiency of an assassination. Instead, I messaged my firm's head of opposition research, a man named Donovan, who possessed the moral flexibility of a boa constrictor and the skills to match. My request was simple and untraceable within our internal systems, logged as due diligence for a potential acquisition. Asterisk, full financial workup. Mark and David Hayes. I want every creditor, every loan covenant, every margin account, every last desperate deal they've made in the last 5 years. I want to know where they bleed. I need it in 90 minutes. The reply was instantaneous, asterisk on it. While Donovan's sharks went to work, I opened a secure channel to a different kind of asset. My own legal counsel, Evelyn Reed. She was the sharpest corporate litigator in Boston, a woman who could smell a contractual loophole from across the harbor. "Evelyn," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Hypothetical." "My favorite kind," she replied, her voice crisp. "Let me guess. It involves a large sum of money and someone with questionable ethics." "100 million," I said, "and 2 men with no ethics at all. A forged will has been entered into probate. I have irrefutable proof of fraud, a paid-off witness, and digital forensics that place the forgery a week after its supposed signing." There was a moment of professional appreciation on the other end. "That's not a legal case, Caleb, that's a firing squad. When do we file?" "We don't," I said. "Not yet. I want you to draft an emergency injunction to freeze the entire estate. Every account, every asset. Cite gross mismanagement and potential fraud. I want it ready to file with a single keystroke. But we hold until I give the word. We let them think they're still in control of the board." "You're not just trying to win, are you?" she asked, a hint of admiration in her tone. "You want to burn their kingdom to the ground first." "The ground is too good for them," I replied. I want to sink it into the sea. 80 minutes later, Donovan's report hit my inbox. It was a masterpiece of financial evisceration. David's real estate company, Hayes Developments, wasn't just a house of cards. It was a single card standing in a hurricane. He was leveraged to the hilt with one primary lender, Atlantic Merchants Bank. He'd used personal guarantees, cross-collateralized his failing properties, and was on the verge of defaulting on a massive construction loan. The infusion of cash from my grandfather's estate was the only thing keeping the bank from foreclosing and wiping him out completely. He was using stolen money to patch a sinking ship. Mark was even more predictable. He had poured millions from the initial stock liquidation into a single high-risk biotech company, leveraging his position with dangerously aggressive options contracts. He wasn't investing. He was at the roulette table, betting our family's legacy on a single spin of the wheel. The report pinpointed the exact strike prices and expiration dates. He was betting the stock would soar. I smiled. It was the first time I'd felt anything other than ice in my veins since this began. They hadn't just given me the motive and the means. They'd handed me the blueprints to their own destruction. My first move was against David. I had Donovan's team sanitize the report on Hayes Developments, stripping any mention of Sterling Financial or my name. It became an anonymous, terrifyingly detailed risk analysis from a concerned, quote, market observer. I then had it sent from an encrypted, untraceable email address to one person, the chief compliance officer at Atlantic Merchants Bank. The subject line was succinct: your Hayes Developments exposure. The message was even simpler: he's using fraudulent funds to meet his capital calls. Do your own due diligence. You have 48 hours before this goes public. Banks don't like risk. What they hate even more is public scandal. The compliance officer would be legally obligated to investigate. David's lifeline was about to be strangled. Next, it was Mark's turn. I looked at the biotech company he was gambling on. It was a classic pump and dump, inflated on hype and empty promises. I opened my personal trading terminal, not the firm's, my own. My uncles thought $100 million was a fortune. To me, it was leverage. I began to systematically build a massive short position against the stock. I wasn't just betting it would fail. I was going to be the reason it failed. Using my own capital, I started flooding the market with sell orders, driving the price down with overwhelming, relentless pressure. For an hour, I was no longer a wealth manager. I was an apex predator. Every click of the mouse was a blow, every trade a perfectly placed strike. The stock began to dip. Then it slid. Then it plunged. On another screen, I watched the real-time data on Mark's options contracts. The value was evaporating, turning from millions into dust. Soon, the margin calls would begin. His broker would demand more cash to cover his losses. Cash he thought he had, but which was about to be frozen by David's panicked lender. I leaned back, the city lights twinkling below me. I had set 2 fires, on opposite sides of their camp. Now I would just watch them run. My phone buzzed, shattering the silence. It was an unknown number, I answered, putting it on speaker. A frantic, sputtering voice I barely recognized as Uncle Mark's filled the room. "Who is this? What are you doing?" "The stock. It's collapsing. Someone is targeting it." I said nothing. "Is this you, Caleb?" he shrieked, the arrogance gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. "Are you doing this?" I let the silence answer him, a cold, empty void that spoke volumes. I could hear his ragged, desperate breaths. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew. I disconnected the call without a word and watched the stock price fall another 5%. The margin calls would be hitting his account. The call from David came less than 10 minutes later. I patched it through my office system, letting it record. I could hear Mark screaming in the background, a wild animal caught in a trap. "They froze everything," David roared into the phone, his voice cracking. "Atlantic Merchants. They're calling an emergency audit. They mentioned fraudulent funds. How could they know? Who told them?" "Maybe you should ask Mark," I suggested, my voice calm as a frozen lake. "He's been liquidating assets like a drunken sailor." People notice that kind of desperation. "This was you!" Mark shrieked, obviously grabbing the phone. "My broker just called. I'm wiped out, Caleb. Wiped out. The margin calls. It's millions. You did this." "Did what, Uncle Mark?" I asked, leaning forward in my chair, savoring every syllable. "Did I force you to leverage our family's entire future on a garbage biotech stock? Did I sign your name on the options contracts? That was your signature, wasn't it? Or did you forge that too?" The line went dead. The silence was more satisfying than any confession. They had lost control. Now they would come to me, because they had nowhere else to go. They arrived an hour later, looking like ghosts who had been mugged. Mark's expensive suit was rumpled, his face ashen. David, usually so composed, had the wild eyes of a man watching his life burn down on a live feed. My assistant showed them into my office, and I didn't stand. I simply gestured to the two chairs opposite my desk, positioning myself behind the vast expanse of polished ebony like a judge behind the bench. They didn't sit. "Fix it," David demanded, his voice a low, ragged growl. I raised an eyebrow. "Fix what? Your catastrophic business model? Mark's gambling addiction? You'll need more than a wealth manager for that. I can recommend a good therapist." "Don't play games with us, boy." Mark spat, his panic curdling into rage. "You crashed that stock. You tipped off the bank. This is your doing. You're destroying us." "No," I said, my voice dropping, losing all its warmth and becoming something hard and sharp. "You're destroying yourselves. I'm just accelerating the process." I stood up slowly, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the harbor. Grandfather built an empire from nothing. He weathered recessions, market crashes, and betrayals you two couldn't even imagine. He built something that was supposed to last for generations. A legacy. I turned to face them, my shadow falling across them in the afternoon light. "And what did you do with it?" "The moment you got your hands on it, you treated it like a winning lottery ticket. David, you used it as a bandage for your dying real estate company, a business so poorly managed it should have collapsed a decade ago. And you, Mark," I said, my eyes locking onto his, "you took a century of hard work and prudent investment and bet it all on a single spin of the roulette wheel. And you lost." I walked back to my desk, my footsteps echoing in the silent office. "You talk about me, destroying you. You call this revenge. This isn't revenge. This is natural justice. It's the inevitable financial consequence of your own greed and incompetence. You weren't fit to manage a child's allowance, let alone a $100 million estate." David slumped into one of the chairs, the fight draining out of him. "What do you want, Caleb?" he whispered. "There's nothing left. It's gone." "Oh, it's not all gone," I said, a thin, cruel smile touching my lips. "It's just misplaced." I steepled my fingers, looking at them both. "But I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to offer you a way out. A simple deal." A flicker of desperate hope appeared in Mark's eyes. "What?" "Anything. It's very straightforward," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Put it all back." They stared at me, confused. "Every single dollar you and Mark liquidated. Every asset you leveraged. Restore the estate to its precise value as of the day you read that fraudulent will in the lawyer's office. Do that, and I'll call off my traders. I'll make an anonymous call to the bank and tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Put it all back, and we can all go back to pretending you're competent businessmen." The hope in Mark's eyes died, replaced by a horrifying understanding. David just stared blankly, the impossibility of the demand crushing him. They couldn't put it back. The money from the stock market was vaporized. The funds David had wired were now locked in a frozen account, about to be seized by a bank that was no longer his friend. I had offered them a key to a door that no longer existed. "Get out of my office," I said softly. They stumbled out. Two broken men who had lost a war they never even knew they were fighting. The moment the door clicked shut, I picked up my phone and dialed Evelyn Reed. "It's time," I said, my voice steady. "File everything." "With pleasure," she replied. The call lasted less than 10 seconds. The fallout was immediate and biblical. Within the hour, federal marshals were at David's office, serving the emergency injunction and asset freeze. Atlantic Merchants Bank, now fully aware they were victims of wire fraud, moved to seize every asset he had left to cover his defaulted loans. Mark's brokerage firm, facing its own compliance nightmare, locked his accounts and reported him to the SEC for market manipulation. The fraudulent lawyer, Mr. Grant, found his world collapsing when investigators from the state bar arrived at his office with a warrant. I had not just pulled the mountain out from under them, I'd triggered a landslide that buried them alive. 2 weeks later, we were back in the same mahogany-paneled room. This time, the smugness was gone, replaced by the sour smell of fear. Mark and David sat silently, flanked by public defenders, their expensive suits replaced by ill-fitting desperation. Mr. Grant was not present. He had already been disbarred, his name already scraped from the door. I placed my grandfather's sealed manila envelope on the table, the one he had given me in his study. The court-appointed probate officer broke the seal and began to read from the true will. It was simple, direct, and ironclad. The bulk of the $100 million estate was placed in a secure trust for my sister and me, but my grandfather, a master strategist to the very end, saved his final words for his sons. The officer cleared his throat and read the final damning clause. "To my sons, Mark and David, I leave the exact sum of money they attempted to offer my grandchildren, a token amount to keep them comfortable. They have proven themselves to be men who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. This inheritance was a final test of character, and they have failed in a manner more spectacular than I could have ever imagined. Let their greed be their only legacy." A choked, guttural sound escaped Mark's throat. David just stared at the polished table, seeing the reflection of a ruined man. I stood up, leaving the envelope, the truth, on the table between them. I didn't need to say another word. My grandfather already had. When family betrays you for money, do they deserve a second chance, or is it time for payback? Let me know what you would do in my situation.